For 20 long years, he built an empire, but never let a single woman touch his heart or his life. Rumors swirled about the black billionaire CEO who lived in solitude, consumed by power, haunted by a past no one dared to question. Employees whispered, "He doesn't hire women." But everything changed the day she walked in. His new assistant. A woman who didn't bow to his arrogance, who wasn't dazzled by his wealth, and who carried secrets of her own. He thought she was just another employee. He was wrong. What started as a business arrangement would ignite a storm of betrayal, temptation, and truth so shocking. It would destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. The world knew his name long before they ever saw his face. Cameron Blake, the black billionaire CEO whose name was etched in every financial magazine, every stock market headline, every whispered conversation about power and money. He didn't come from wealth. His story was the kind people turned into documentaries. An orphan boy from the roughest neighborhood, clawing his way out of poverty, building an empire brick by brick with blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. But, while the world admired his brilliance, there was one thing no one could quite understand. Why did Cameron Blake live like a man untouched by love? No scandals, no dates, no gossip of women in his life, not in 20 years. His employees joked about it behind closed doors. The boss is a machine, they said. Work is his mistress. But the truth was far darker than any rumor could paint. Cameron's life was a fortress built on rules, and the most unshakable of them all was this: no woman would ever get close to him again. He had been burned before, scorched so deeply it carved scars no one could see. Love had once been his weakness, and it had cost him everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the storm of heartbreak. He had buried it so far down that not even his oldest friends dared to speak of it. From that day forward, he closed the door on intimacy, poured every ounce of his soul into business, and became untouchable. For 2 decades, Cameron ruled like a king. He hired the best men in the industry, men who obeyed his commands without hesitation. His office was a sanctuary of control, minimalist, pristine, cold. No laughter, no softness, just numbers, deadlines, and dominance. And then, she came. Her name was Alina Brooks, 28 years old, sharp, resilient, beautiful in a way that didn't scream for attention but stole it anyway. She wasn't supposed to be there. In fact, Cameron's company had a silent, unspoken policy: no female assistants. It wasn't written anywhere, but everyone knew the rule, until the day fate decided otherwise. The previous assistant, Cameron's most trusted aide, was suddenly gone, taken down by a scandal no one saw coming. There was no time for interviews, no time for background checks. The company was in chaos, and the board demanded stability. That's when Alina appeared, calm, confident, with a resume that silenced every doubt. From the moment she walked into his office, Cameron felt something shift. He didn't like it, not one bit. Her presence was like a crack in the armor he'd spent years forging. She didn't fawn over him like others did. She didn't trip over her words in awe of his power. If anything, she looked at him with eyes that saw through him, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Alina wasn't like the women he remembered. She wasn't draped in jewels, chasing status, or hungering for his attention. She was precise, efficient, and fiercely independent. Her first words to him weren't flattery, they were about the work. About fixing what his former assistant had left in shambles. And she did it. Flawlessly. But there was something else about her, something Cameron couldn't name. He caught glimpses of it in the way her expression hardened when she thought no one was watching, in the way her eyes lingered on the photographs of his past before she quickly looked away. She wasn't just an assistant. She was hiding something, something that would collide with his carefully controlled life in ways he couldn't imagine. The days turned into weeks, and Cameron found himself drawn to her in ways that terrified, Him. He hated that he noticed the curve of her lips when she smiled. He hated that her voice lingered in his head after she left the room. He hated that the walls he had built for 2 decades were starting to crack. And Alina, she noticed. But she had her own reasons for being there. Reasons that had nothing to do with a paycheck. She had walked into Cameron Blake's empire with a mission, one that could either destroy him or set him free. Neither of them knew that the moment their paths crossed, the clock started ticking on everything they thought they knew about loyalty, power, and love. The first week passed without incident. Cameron barely spoke to Alina beyond issuing clipped instructions. She obeyed them with surgical precision, never late, never flustered, never overstepping. To the outside world, she was simply another assistant. But Cameron felt the disturbance like a silent hum in the air. It was in the way his thoughts drifted to her during meetings, in the way his chest tightened when he caught the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the corridor. It wasn't loud. This feeling. It was insidious, creeping like a shadow he thought he'd outrun decades ago. He told himself it was nothing, that it would fade, that discipline would drown it. But discipline failed when Alina started doing things no one had ever done for him before. Not with grand gestures, but with subtle precision. She anticipated his needs before he spoke them. She corrected mistakes before he noticed them. She made his life easier in ways that felt personal. And Cameron hated it. He hated how she reminded him that he was still a man of flesh and blood, not the cold machine he pretended to be. Week 2 brought the first breach in his armor. A storm lashed the city that night, trapping employees in the office tower after hours. Most of them called rides, eager to escape, but Cameron stayed in his office, working as always. He didn't notice Alina was still there until he heard the soft clink of a coffee cup. "You're still here," he said, his voice low, controlled. "I don't leave until you do," she replied simply, setting the cup on his desk. He stared at her, his jaw tightening. "That's not in your job description." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Neither is letting you drown in deadlines while the rest of the building sleeps." It wasn't her words that unsettled him. It was the steadiness in her voice. No fear. No flattery. Just truth. That night marked a shift. From then on, Cameron noticed her in ways he couldn't ignore. The way she tied her hair into a knot when she was deep in thought. The way her fingertips grazed the edge of papers, as if memorizing the texture. The way her eyes lingered on his when she handed him a report. Too long to be casual, too brief to be obvious. He told himself to stop noticing, to bury it, to remind himself who he was, a man who didn't need anyone, a man who vowed never to feel again. But Alina made forgetting impossible. By week 3, whispers started among the staff. They saw the glances, the stolen moments, the tension that seemed to crackle in the air when the two were in the same room. They didn't dare speak it aloud, not where Cameron could hear, but the rumors spread like wildfire. And then came the first real test. It was a gala, one of those glittering affairs where wealth danced under chandeliers and cameras flashed, like lightning. Cameron hated them. But for the sake of investors, he attended. He didn't plan to take anyone with him. He never did. But the morning of the event, Alina walked into his office, holding an envelope. "Your schedule for tonight," she said, placing it on the desk. He scanned it quickly, then paused. "You added an extra seat at the table." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Why?" Her lips curved into a polite smile. "Because you can't keep showing up alone, Mr. Blake. People notice." His brow furrowed. "And you assume that seat is for you?" "No," she said smoothly. "I don't assume. But if you'd prefer I stay behind, I will." She turned to leave, but something in him stopped her. Why was he hesitating? Why did the thought of walking into that ballroom without her feel wrong? "Be ready at 8, he said finally, his voice betraying nothing. That night, the city burned with lights, and Cameron walked into the gala with Alina by his side. The room fell silent for a fraction of a second, long enough for every eye to turn, every whisper to spark. He didn't care, or at least, he told himself he didn't. But when the cameras flashed, when her arm brushed his as they moved through the crowd, when her laughter spilled like warm honey in a room full of brittle smiles, he felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Alive, and it terrified him, because desire was dangerous. Desire was weakness. Desire was the crack through which everything else could pour in: betrayal, pain, ruin. He had lived that lesson once. He wouldn't live it again. So he pulled away. The next day he buried himself in work, made his tone sharper, his orders colder. He thought distance would kill whatever this was, but Alina didn't retreat. She stayed, calm, composed, efficient as ever. Except now, there was something in her eyes, a flicker, a question. She wanted to know why he was fighting so hard. And part of him wanted to tell her, but the truth was a poison he refused to spill. Then came the moment that shattered everything. It was late, long after the building had emptied, long after the city outside had sunk into darkness. Cameron was in his office, sleeves rolled up, eyes burning from hours of work. He didn't hear the door open until her voice cut through the silence. "You need to stop doing this to yourself." He looked up, startled. She stood there, a file in her hands, her face "This is my company," he said coldly. "This is your prison," she countered. The words hit him like a strike to the chest. He rose slowly, his height casting a shadow that swallowed the distance between them. "You don't know me." Her gaze didn't falter. "Then let me." For a heartbeat, the air stilled. 2 decades of walls, 2 decades of vows, 2 decades of silence, crumbling in the space of a breath. He should have turned away. He should have ended it there. But when her hand brushed his as she passed him the file, when her skin burned against his like fire meeting ice, he knew the battle was over, not because he wanted it to be, but because fate had already decided. And neither of them knew that this wasn't just about desire. It was about secrets buried too deep, lies woven too tight, and a truth that would rip both their worlds apart. Because Alina Brooks wasn't just an assistant. She wasn't there by chance. She was there for a reason. And the closer Cameron drew to her, the closer he came to the one thing he'd spent 20 years running from: the truth. The night it all unraveled began like any other. Cameron sat in his office, the city stretching beneath him like a glittering ocean of glass and steel. He had been trying, desperately, to regain control of himself, of the situation, of the dangerous pull that had grown between him and Alina. For weeks, he'd buried himself deeper in work, adding walls where cracks had begun to form. But walls couldn't stop what was already inside, because no matter how hard he tried to bury it, Alina was everywhere. In the scent of the coffee she brought each morning, in the rhythm of her heels clicking down the marble hallway, in the way her eyes seemed to hold something unspoken every time they met his, and now that something was about to break free. It started with a phone call. Cameron had been reviewing contracts when his private line rang. Only a handful of people had the number, and none of them ever called without reason. He answered sharply. "Mr. Blake," the voice on the other end said, smooth and unfamiliar. "We should talk about Alina Brooks." His hand froze on the desk. "Who?" "'Tis this?" he demanded. "That's not important," the voice replied, calm, almost amused. "What's important is that the woman sitting outside your office isn't who you think she is." The line went dead. Cameron stared at the receiver, his mind a storm. He could have dismissed it as a prank, except something in the man's tone gnawed at him. certainty, a threat. He stepped out of his office. Alina looked up from her desk, her face serene as always, but now he saw it differently. Was that serenity hiding something? Was that confidence a mask? "Clear my schedule for tomorrow," he said curtly. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice even. But as she turned back to her computer, Cameron felt it, a fissure in the foundation of trust he had barely allowed himself to build. That night, he didn't go home. He didn't sleep. He dug background checks, employment records, every scrap of data his resources could find on Alina Brooks, and what he found didn't add up. Her resume was impeccable, too impeccable. Her references were flawless, too flawless. And then he saw it, one name, buried deep in a trail of corporate shells and dissolved companies. A name he hadn't spoken in 20 years. Alina Ward, the woman who destroyed him, the woman who left him, shattered, broken, humiliated, Alina's mother. The realization hit him like a blade to the gut. His chest constricted. His breath came in, sharp, shallow bursts. 20 years ago, Alina Ward had taken everything from him, his heart, his trust, and nearly his empire. And now her daughter sat in his office, wearing that same look of quiet defiance. Why was she here? For revenge? For justice? For answers? By the time dawn bled into the skyline, Cameron knew one thing. This couldn't be coincidence, and he was going to confront her. When Alina walked into his office the next morning, everything looked the same. But nothing was. The air was heavier. His gaze was sharper, and when he spoke, his voice was steel. "Close the door." She obeyed, setting her tablet down, unaware, or pretending to be, that the ground beneath her feet was about to shatter. "Sit," he ordered. She sat, calm, composed. But he saw the flicker in her eyes when he leaned forward, hands clasped. On the desk. "Who are you really, Alina?" Her brow furrowed, just slightly. "I don't understand the question." He slammed a file on the desk. Photographs spilled out. Of her mother, of a past Cameron had tried to bury. "Don't play games with me," he growled. "You're Alina Ward's daughter." For the first time since he met her, Alina faltered. It was fleeting, a tremor in her breath, a shadow in her gaze, but he caught it. "So it's true," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You came here for me." Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then, slowly, Alina straightened her spine. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady. "I came here for you." His fists clenched. Fury surged through him like fire, but beneath it, worse than it, was something colder. Betrayal. Why? His voice cracked like a whip. "To finish what she started. To destroy me." Her eyes flashed. "No, to understand you." The words hit him like a blow. He stared at her, stunned. "You think I don't know what you did to her?" she said, rising from her chair, her voice sharp with something between anger and grief. "You think I don't know how you left her with nothing, how you crushed her to save yourself?" "That's a lie," Cameron spat. "She betrayed me. She loved you." Alina's voice rang through the room, raw and unguarded. "And you left her to burn when everything fell apart. She spent the rest of her life trying to survive what you did to her." Cameron's breath came hard and fast. Memories crashed over him, memories he had buried in chains. The affair, the accusations, the scandal that nearly destroyed his company. In his mind, Alina had always been the villain, the traitor, the reason for his vow to never love again. But now, standing before him was her daughter, her voice trembling with conviction, her eyes blazing with truths he had never faced. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said hoarsely. "You don't know what she was capable of." "I know she died with your name on her lips," Alina shot back. The words gutted him, For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All the years of control, of coldness, of pretending, he didn't care. They crumbled in an instant. And then, something shifted. Because beneath the fury, beneath the hurt, beneath the jagged shards of their shared past, he saw her. Not Alina. Alina. The woman who had walked into his life and cracked it wide open. The woman who had challenged him, saved him, tempted him. The woman who now stood there, trembling not with hatred, but with something else, something that mirrored the storm raging inside him. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his shadow falling over her. She stiffened, her breath hitching as he stopped inches away. "Tell me the truth," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Why did you really come here?" Her eyes met his, unflinching. "To make you feel what she felt." His heart lurched. "And do you?" he asked, his voice like smoke. "Do you feel it?" For a heartbeat, silence. Then barely above a whisper, "Yes." The admission shattered everything. The rage, the vengeance, the years of bitterness. All of it dissolved in the heat of something neither of them could deny anymore. He reached for her. Not in anger, but in surrender. And when her lips met his, it wasn't soft. It was fire and fury and 20 years of buried desire exploding in a single, desperate collision. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was war turned into passion, pain turned into hunger, hate turned into something dangerously close to love. And neither of them knew if it would save them or destroy them both. The world outside Cameron Blake's penthouse office still glittered like nothing had changed. But inside, the storm had torn through everything. Alina sat on the edge of the desk, her breathing unsteady, her eyes fixed on the skyline as if it held the answers she couldn't find. Her lips were swollen from his kiss. Her heart was pounding. With the weight of what had just happened, not just the passion, but the truth hanging between them like a loaded gun. Cameron stood near the window, his back to her, his hands clenched into fists. He had spent 2 decades building walls no one could breach. And in one night, Alina Brooks had blown them to dust. But the question lingered, bitter and sharp. What now? "Say something," she whispered. His reflection stared back at her from the glass. Hard, unreadable, but cracking at the edges. Slowly he turned. "You should leave," he said, his voice low, guttural. The words sliced through her like a blade, but she held his gaze. "That's it? After everything?" "After everything," he repeated, stepping closer. "You came here to destroy me, Alina. You said it yourself." She rose from the desk, fire flickering in her eyes. "I came here to make you feel what she felt. And I did. But not like this. Not like whatever this is." His jaw tightened. "This is a mistake." "No," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "A mistake is something you regret, and I don't regret a damn thing." For a moment, silence, heavy, suffocating. Then Cameron turned away, his chest rising and falling with the weight of everything unspoken. He thought of Alina, how her laughter once lit up his world, how her betrayal had burned it down. He thought of the years he spent in exile from his own heart, convincing himself he didn't need anyone. And then he thought of Alina, standing there, fierce and fragile, her presence like oxygen in a life he hadn't realized was suffocating him, and he knew, with a clarity that terrified him, that he couldn't let her go. But the past wasn't done with them yet. 3 days later, the story broke. Headlines blazed across financial news sites. Cameron Blake's company under investigation for corporate scandal. Anonymous leaks, false accusations, a smear campaign designed to destroy everything he had built. And it all traced back to one name, Alina Ward. Or rather, the people who had once backed her. Powerful enemies Cameron had crushed years ago. Enemies who hadn't forgotten. Enemies who now saw Alina as their pawn. When the news hit, the boardroom erupted in chaos. Investors panicked, stocks plummeted, and Cameron, for the first time in 20 years, felt the empire he built slipping through his fingers, and through it all, Alina stayed. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood by him as the wolves circled, her voice steady, her eyes burning with a promise he didn't deserve but couldn't let go of. "You think I did this," she said one night, when the weight of suspicion hung between them like smoke. "I don't know what to think," he admitted, his voice raw. "Then let me make it simple," she said, stepping close, her breath warm against his skin. "I didn't come here to destroy you. I came here to see if you were the man my mother said you were, and now I know the truth." His eyes searched hers, desperate, broken. "And what's the truth?" "That you're not a monster," she whispered. "You're a man who made a mistake and spent 20 years punishing himself for it." The words gutted him. And for the first time since Alina, Cameron Blake let the walls fall, not in anger, not in lust, but in surrender. The battle was brutal. The investigation clawed through every corner of his empire. Shareholders turned cold. The media feasted on his downfall. But Cameron didn't crumble. He fought, harder than ever. And this time, he didn't fight alone. Alina became his fiercest ally, digging through files, unearthing evidence, connecting threads only she could see. Because she knew the enemy better than anyone. She knew the whispers, the shadows, the power plays left over from her mother's war. And when the truth came out, it hit like a thunderclap. The leaks were orchestrated by the same men who had ruined Alina and tried to use her daughter to finish the job. Alina exposed them, Cameron destroyed them, and when the dust settled, the empire stood stronger than before. But the cost was Alina's secret. When the scandal ended, when the headlines faded, when the boardroom silence finally returned, Cameron called her into his office. She stood before him, not as his assistant, not as his lover, but as the woman who had saved him and broken him all at once. "You're leaving," he said, his voice hollow. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's what's best." "Best for who?" "For both of us," she whispered. He wanted to stop her. God, he wanted to, but he couldn't cage her, not after everything. Not after knowing who she was, what she carried, and what she had sacrificed. For him. So he let her go. And for the first time in 20 years, Cameron Blake felt something he had forgotten how to feel. Pain that didn't harden into rage. Pain that was real. Pain that mattered. 6 months later, the empire thrived. The scandal was a memory. Cameron Blake was still the man at the top of the world. Richer, more powerful than ever. But the fortress wasn't the same, because in one quiet corner of his office, on a shelf lined with awards and headlines, sat a single photograph of her, Alina Brooks, the woman who walked into his life to avenge a past and ended up rewriting his future. He never touched another woman, not in 20 years, not until her. And as the city lights burned outside his window, Cameron Blake closed his eyes, a whisper escaping his lips like a prayer he didn't know he still believed in. "Come back to me, because some stories don't end. They wait, and this one was far from over."